Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupane avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. So before we start our discussion, we'll just have a small song by Marita. So I request her.
River? Peace like a river, it floweth so free, out from the heart of infinity. O blessed Spirit, it floweth for thee. Peace like a river, peace like a river, peace like a river to him who believes, peace to the heart that the Savior receives, peace to the spirit that sorrows and grieves. Peace like a river, peace like a river, peace like a river, it floweth alway, making the darkness as fair as the day. Peace like a river, O weary one, pray for peace like a river, peace like a river.
So as you may have seen that today's topic will be just carrying on our study of the Western philosophy which we had started. We have first talk was the beginnings, and then we've had one discussion on the pre-Socratic philosophers. Today again we'll be discussing three of these pre-Socratic philosophers. You must have seen their names. That is Heraclitus, Democritus and Pythagoras. So let us start with a quote of Will Durant. He says, "There is a pleasure in philosophy and a lure even in the mirages of metaphysics, which every student feels until the coarse necessities of physical existence drag him from the heights of thought into the mart of economic strife and gain." So our aim should be that our mind should never be dragged down, even though we have to do our duties and we have to look after our economic gains also, but the mind should always be tuned to higher things. That is the real aim of life, and this can be done as we have seen in the case of many saints and sages. So before starting our discussion today, we'll just have a little recapitulation. What we have discussed earlier in the very short form, starting with Thales. So I'll just share the images and their primary teachings. So this is Thales, you know that he's supposed to have looked like this, and These are his important teachings which he had discussed. One of the legendary seven wise men, he is supposed to have introduced mathematical and astronomical science into Greece. He predicted an eclipse and believed that water is the original substance out of which everything else is formed. Then next we come to Anaximander. This is his bust. He was the first to develop a cosmology. Then a remarkable declaration. He said that all things come from a singular substance which is eternal and ageless and encompasses all the worlds. Then another very notable thing, he was the first to publish a map of the world. And one of his great speculations that celestial bodies make full circles and earth floats free and unsupported in space. That was revolutionary at that time. Now we come to Anaximenes. This is how he looked like, and about his teachings. He made the common analogy between the divine air that sustains the universe and the human air or soul that animates people. Then we come to Xenophanes. This is his bust. So, of course, he was a Greek poet and of course a religious thinker also. A precursor of the Eleatic school of philosophy, which stressed unity rather than diversity and viewed the separate existence of material things as apparent rather than real. So very much like our own Indian monism. Next we come to Parmenides. This is how he looked like. He belonged to southern Italy and was the founder of Eleatic school, one of the leading pre-Socratic schools of Greek thought. Here also Parmenides also held that the multiplicity of existing things are but an appearance of a single eternal reality. So again, very much similar to our Indian monism. So now we will start today from Heraclitus. Heraclitus is a very wonderful carving, you can see. This is how he is supposed to have looked like. So let us start with what Heraclitus has to tell us. So we will go into a little detail about Heraclitus and about Democritus and Pythagoras. Especially about Pythagoras, hardly anything is known. And Democritus, there is only one important thing to discuss. But Heraclitus was a very revolutionary philosopher. So let us see what he has to teach us. Primarily, Heraclitus is remembered for his cosmology. And we have seen that Thales thought that water is the source of everything. Similarly, Heraclitus said that it is fire which forms the basic material principle of an orderly universe. According to him, it was fire. Now, unfortunately, very little is known of his life. Most of what has been handed down to us consists of stories, apparently invented. to illustrate his character as inferred from his writings. His native Ephesus was a prominent city of Ionia, the Greek inhabited coast of Asia Minor, but at that time it was subject to Persian rule. And he is supposed to have written only one book, but unfortunately that has been lost. So what we know of him we know from the later philosophers who mentioned his works and all that. So Heraclitus was a very revolutionary person. He made every effort to break out of the mold of contemporary thought, contemporary Greek philosophical thought. And his most fundamental departure from previous philosophers lies in his emphasis of human affairs. He concentrated more on human beings rather than astronomy or abstract principles. Principles are all right, but how do they affect us? That is the most important thing. And that is actually what we are concerned with. Whether there are 20 planets or 100 planets doesn't make much difference in our practical life. So he was the first to lay emphasis on this aspect. While he continues many of the physical and cosmological theories of his predecessors, but he shifts his focus. That is the thing. From the cosmic to the human realm. That is the thing. And that is actually what is important for people like us. Now, one of his main themes was, unfortunately or fortunately, the blindness of human beings. That why and how human beings are blind to the reality. And that actually finds an echo in our Indian philosophers also. Many lament that we are busy with external things, but we are blind to what is actually real. So it is not that Heraclitus was the only one who said this. To quote him, he said, "Men are unaware of what they do when they are awake, just as they are forgetful of what they do when they are asleep." So when we are sleeping, we don't know what we are doing. He said there is no difference between the waking state and sleeping state in ordinary human beings. Because while waking also, they don't know what they are doing. So in Sanskrit, it finds an echo in our philosophy. In Sanskrit, they say that human beings are in moha nidra. Moha means delusion. Nidra means sleeping. So we are also in moha nidra, means we are deluded. We don't know what we are doing. How many of us really think before we do something? If you ask someone, suppose someone is either going for higher education or is getting married, is having children, anything, if you ask him, are you doing this after much thought? Why are you doing this? 99% of us will be confused. I am doing this because everybody else is doing it. So that is what our philosophers and even Heraclitus seems to lament over. And he said that people do not learn what they actually should. To quote Heraclitus, he said, "Many do not understand such things as they encounter, nor do they learn by experience, although they think they do." We don't learn by experience. Once you put a hand into a fire, if the hand is burning, we should know, don't put it into the fire again. But do we realize that? Sri Ramakrishna says that a camel likes to eat thorny plants. Blood is gushing out. But he is again and again doing the same thing. So most of us are doing the same thing over and over again. Not even realizing that this will not lead to our ultimate good. So that is why Heraclitus believed that most people, ordinary people, are not capable of attaining true wisdom. According to him, true understanding is a rare and precious commodity which even most reputed sages sometimes do not attain to. It is so difficult. But like our sages, he said, wisdom actually is possible for each one of us. But we do not look in that way, we do not look in the right direction. So he said that all men have a share in self-knowledge and sound thinking. Nobody can be denied that wisdom if he tries, really tries. But problem is, men do not even think in that way. That is the problem. So this was the first thing he said, and the second, he stressed the need for people to live together in harmony. But this harmony was not what we understand, like adjust, cooperate, not that. It was on a higher level. This harmony was on the cosmic level. He complained that most people failed to comprehend the logos. That is a very famous concept in Greek philosophy. Logos means reason. Reasoning, sound thinking. So this is very much like our Eastern philosophy's rhythm. Rhythm means the cosmic order. So this is the logos in Greek philosophy, the universal principle through which all things are interrelated and all natural events occur. So because we don't comprehend this order, we live like dreamers with a false view of the world. We see the world, but we don't know what it really is. This world order, cosmos, according to Heraclitus, is the same for all. No God nor man created it, but it ever was, is, and will be. This order is eternal. So very much like our Eastern philosophy. And another wonderful thing which Heraclitus is a wonderful insight which no Greek philosopher had this insight in mind, and it is very, very similar to what Swami Vivekananda says about the concept of Maya, which we had discussed earlier. So, this logos is there, the eternal order. Now, we may think that when we talk of the eternal order in the world, that eternal order means what? For us, orderliness means everything will be peaceful, blissful, in harmony always. That is the world order. But that is not the truth, which we also experience and which Swami Vivekananda also has said. And the same thing Heraclitus says. What does he say? He says this logos exists eternally, but a significant manifestation of the logos, according to Heraclitus, is the underlying connection between opposites. For example, he says health and disease define each other. If there is no disease, the term health will have no meaning at all. If you are not healthy, then our being diseased will have no meaning at all. So these two terms define each other and they will always go together. They cannot be separated. As Swami Vivekananda says, just like the two sides of a coin, it cannot be separated. So similarly, good and evil, hot and cold, and other opposites are also similarly related. This is a very revolutionary concept. And in addition, he noted that a single substance may be perceived in various ways. Now, problem is I say A is good, B is bad. And if someone says B is good, A is bad, I start arguing with him. All the arguments in the world are just because people look at the same thing in different ways. We forget that depending upon the time, circumstances and person, both these views may be correct. So Heraclitus says a single substance may be perceived in various ways. He says sea water, suppose we go into an argument, discussion, sea water is beneficial or harmful. People will put their own arguments. So he says it is both. It is harmful for human beings. If we drink it, we will fall sick. If we go deep, we will drown. But it is beneficial for fishes. So a substance in itself is neither good or bad. So similar to Swami Vivekananda's teachings. So his understanding of the relation of opposites to each other, this understanding enabled him to overcome the chaotic and divergent nature of the world. While ordinary people like us see everything chaos. But these persons, these sages, they see the underlying truth between which stands as the base of this apparently chaotic world. So he says that the world exists as a coherent system. It is not chaos. World exists as a coherent system in which a change in one direction is ultimately balanced by a corresponding change in another direction. Suppose all people were healthy, nobody will ever fall sick. Then Dr. Bhatt would have been in great difficulty. Like all the doctors, the whole medical industry would have collapsed. Hundreds and thousands of people would have been out of jobs. So what we think to be evil is causing good to somewhere at some place. So that is why a very, very revolutionary statement by Heraclitus, I again repeat, that the world exists as a coherent system in which a change in one direction is ultimately balanced by a corresponding change in another. Between all things there is a hidden connection, so that those things which are apparently tending apart are actually, by that very circumstances, they are being brought together. That is the thing. People are searching for miraculous drugs which will bring us back our youth and stop aging and stop death. If people did not die, what would happen in 5 years? Then they would start killing each other. Yeah. So, life and death are synonymous. You cannot separate from one thing to another. If you want to be rid of death, you have to go beyond life. That is the thing. Life without death, death without life has no meaning at all. So wonderful, from these statements, it really seems he was really some spiritual person with definite realization. Otherwise, these thoughts, it's really revolutionary. So what this actually means is, to sum up, conflicting powers of opposites, including those of elemental bodies, make possible the world and all its varieties. This conflicting power of opposite has to be there, otherwise the world would not be there. So I repeat again, conflicting powers of opposites make possible the world and all its variety. Without that conflict, we would have only lifeless uniformity. Even in general things we can say. Suppose we go to some musical program or take some book or something. If everybody unanimously likes that, and all the persons, what would be the interest? There would be no debates, no writing articles, no putting one's view. Everybody likes the same thing, everybody dislikes the same thing. There would be nothing to do then. So, this is what Heraclitus says. Contraries are the same by virtue of constituting a system of connections. Life, death, waking, sleeping, young, old, all these things. And this one other statement of Heraclitus which shows that he was a really highly spiritual person. He said, to quote him, divine power is manifest in all phenomena. In everything which happens, he is telling the will of the divine is there. That's what Eastern saints and sages says. Sri Ramakrishna says that not even a leaf moves without the will of God. So Heraclitus echoes more or less the same thing. He says, divine power is manifest in all phenomena. Good, he says God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, everything. All the opposites. It is nothing but the divine power manifesting in different ways. When it manifests in one way, we say it is life. When it manifests in another way, we say it is death. That is the thing. That is what the philosophy of Shaktas say. Shaktas means worshippers of Shakti. That it is the one divine power. You call it Divine Mother or you call it Brahman, you call it anything. That is manifesting through everything in the universe. All the happenings are only by virtue of that one divine power. But we cannot recognize the power, we see only the surface, that is the events. And we call it good and bad and either start grieving or being elated. That is the thing. So, this is a exceptionally revolutionary thought and really great insight. So, before concluding Heraclitus' philosophy, we will just see some of his quotes. And sometimes he wrote in such a way that it was extremely difficult to understand what he meant to say. It was, our aphorisms which are there, Raji Yoga, Brahma Sutra, all those are written in aphorisms, just a few words. But to understand that, we need a commentary. So his sayings were also just a few words sometimes. But because it didn't have a commentary, it is sometimes very difficult to understand, but very interesting also. So, I will just give you three or four of his quotations. One, which is so difficult to understand, but which has been explained by Plato. So that is a very interesting thing I will share. So Heraclitus said, I quote him, one statement of his, on those stepping into rivers, staying the same, other and other waters flow. He says, again I quote, on those stepping into rivers, when we step into a river, staying the same, he says, the same river, then what happened? Other and other waters flow. Now what does this mean? So Plato gives the explanation. He says, I quote Plato, he said, Heraclitus, I believe, see how he says this thing. Plato explains that I believe what Heraclitus meant is that all things pass and nothing stays. So what does he do in this statement? He compares existing things to the flow of a river. It is the same river, but it is never the same, because it is always flowing. So he says, all things pass and nothing stays, comparing existing things to the flow of a river. So what Heraclitus says is, you cannot step twice into the same river. Once you step out, again you step in, although it is the same river, but it is not the same, because the water is always flowing. So what a wonderful way. So this statement, on those stepping into rivers, staying the same, that is the same river, but other and other waters flow, means the water is always changing. So actually you cannot step into the same river twice. On the same people stepping into rivers, others and other waters flow. So with this reading, it is people who remain the same in contrast to changing waters. As if encounter with a flowing environment helped to constitute the perceiving subject as the same. So it is a comparison. In comparison to the person stepping into the river is always changing. So many such statements are there. Of course, we don't have the time to go into detail, but I will just mention three of his very significant quotations. First is regarding the harmony between opposites. He says, it is disease that makes health pleasant. It is evil that makes good good. It is toil which makes rest enjoyable. See, we all look forward to holidays. But if someone said, okay, be on a holiday eternally, then what will happen? In 5 days we'll be bored or we'll go crazy. So holidays are enjoyable when? Only when they follow toil. After hard work, when we get rest, we enjoy that rest. That is the thing. So after examinations, we all used to run to some movie theater or something. But if you say that, okay, everybody have 24 hours, you keep on watching movies, how long will you enjoy? So this is such a wonderful thing which he says we should really think about this. Then another quote, he says, sound thinking is the greatest virtue. Sound thinking means rational thinking. Think about what you are doing. Sound thinking is the greatest virtue and wisdom. To speak the truth and act on the basis of an understanding of the nature of things. First, understand the nature of the world. Then understand what life's aim is. Then act accordingly. Don't act blindly. Then another wonderful quotation, the character of man is his guardian spirit. Who will guard us? Who will protect us? What will protect us? One thing only, our character. If that is not true, then nothing in the world, nobody in the world can protect us. So he was really, it seems that he was a really enlightened person and wonderful thoughts. If only we could have his original writing, we could have gone deeper. So, but unfortunately, everything has been lost. Now, let us go to Democritus. Democritus, just one point I need to mention. So, about him, according to ancient reports, Democritus was born about 460 BC. So, he was a younger contemporary of Socrates. And some reports mention that he was a citizen of Miletus. Miletus, from where Thales and all had come. So only thing to mention about Democritus is he was an atomist. Atomist means he believed that the world is composed of indivisible particles called the atoms. So just a few words about what being an atomist means, then we will conclude Democritus. So the atomists held that there are two fundamentally different kinds of realities composing the whole world. What are those realities? Atoms and void. Void, what is called Shunya. So according to them, atoms are infinite in number and various in size and shape and perfectly solid with no internal gaps. But they move about in an infinite void, repelling one another when they collide or combining into clusters by means of some tiny hooks on their surface, which become entangled. It is their theory. Other than changing place, atoms are unchangeable. They only go from one place to another, but you cannot change anything in atoms. And they are ungenerated, means they are uncreated and indestructible. They cannot be destroyed. All changes in the visible objects of the world of appearance are brought about by the relocation of these atoms. So according to them, why do the chair and table differ? Because atoms exist in the chair also and table also, but their location is different. They are arranged in a different way. That is what they say. So the atomists reduce all change to change of place only. Macroscopic objects in the world that we experience are really clusters of these atoms. Changes in the objects we see, qualitative changes or growth, are caused by rearrangement or addition to the atoms comprising them. So when a seed becomes a tree, according to them, what happens? More items combine and the seed becomes a tree, and they have some rearrangement or something. So clusters of atoms moving in the infinite void come to form the worlds as a result of circular motion. The circular motion that gathers up atoms into a whirl, just like a storm gathers up the dust. You see dust circling. So they say that there is a circular motion which gathers atoms up into a whirl, creating clusters within it. But these clusters are impermanent. Our world and the species within it have arisen from the collision of atoms moving about in such a whirl, and in likewise disintegrating time. because this clusters is not permanent. Atom will form clusters, then they will disintegrate again. So this is in brief the view of the atomists. For us, it is not necessary to go into much detail about this. So last, for today's discussion, we come to the very famous Pythagoras. Pythagoras, one of the most famous and also one of the most controversial ancient Greek philosophers. He lived from 570 to 490 BC, and he spent his early years on an island of the coast of modern Turkey. At the age of 40, however, he emigrated to a city in southern Italy, and most of his philosophical activity occurred there. Now, the very strange thing about Pythagoras is, although he is so famous, supposed to be very influential, we know practically nothing about it. What are the beliefs and practices of the historical Pythagoras? This apparently simple question is actually the daunting Pythagorean question now. In philosophy, this is known as the Pythagorean question, about which many books have been written. That what was actually the teaching or philosophy of Pythagoras? So why this happened? This, wandering about in the dark regarding this great philosopher. Why this happened? First of all, Pythagoras himself wrote nothing. So our knowledge of his views is entirely derived from the reports of others. First thing. Secondly, there was no extensive or authoritative contemporary account of Pythagoras. Everything came many years after. Third, only fragments of the first detailed account of Pythagoras, written about 150 years after his death, have survived. We know nothing of what happened earlier. Fourth, it is clear that these accounts disagreed with one another on significant points. So whom to believe? So these 4 points would have been enough to create all sorts of difficulties in determining his philosophical beliefs. But a fifth factor complicates the matters even more. Why? By the 3rd century CE, when the first detailed accounts of Pythagoras that survive intact were written, Pythagoras had come to be regarded in some circles as the master philosopher, without any basis, from whom all that was true in the Greek philosophical tradition was derived. And by the end of the 1st century BC, a large collection of books had been forged in his name by Pythagoras, but they had not been written by him at all. Thus, not only is the earliest evidence of his views meager and contradictory, it is overshadowed by such presentation of Pythagoras where he is idolized. He has become a mythical god or something like that. So that is the problem. Given these circumstances, the only reliable approach to answering the Pythagorean question is to start with the earliest evidence. Means actually what facts we have, which is independent of the later attempts to glorify him. So, if we use this method, then we can say only 4 things with certainty. Because otherwise there are so many legends associated with him that it is impossible to really say with authority anything about his life or teaching. So the popular image of Pythagoras is that of a master mathematician and scientist. But the early evidence shows that while Pythagoras was famous in his day, there is no question that he was a historical figure and he was very famous even while alive. That we know. So while Pythagoras was famous in his own day, and even 150 years later, in the time of Aristotle and Plato, it was not mathematics or science upon which his fame rested. There is no evidence of that. So Pythagoras was famous. Why? 4 things. And that also you will see one point is more mythological, more of a story. So first is, he was considered to be an expert on the fate of the soul after death. What will happen after we die? He believed in reincarnation. He said that the soul was immortal but passed through various bodies. This is certain. This we know. Then he was an expert on religious ritual. Like our own ritualistic worship and all, he was an expert on that. Third, he was known as a wonder worker, some type of miraculous worker. And then it is mentioned in early texts that he had a thigh of gold. Nobody knows what it means. It is said that he had also showed his thigh to many persons, it was made of gold. So these are all stories, legends, so to say. Then the fourth thing which we are sure of, that he advocated a very strict discipline. To his followers, he demanded a very strict way of life that emphasized dietary restrictions also. Religious ritual, of course, dietary restriction and rigorous self-discipline. So actually these 4 things are only what we can say with certainty. All other things are conjectures. Actually, his theorem also, what we all study in school, we actually don't know that he wrote it. It is not confirmed. It is going in his name. But this much is sure, one thing he emphasized, the immortality and transmigration of souls. This is very much like our Eastern philosophy. And also virtuous humane behavior towards all living things. We should behave in a proper way. And he was considered by contemporaries and later writers as a mystic, spiritual realization and all that. Not as a mathematician, as is sometimes defined in the present day. And actually his school was associated more with spiritual salvation and divine revelation, not with mathematics. A central belief of his, which would significantly influence Plato, was that philosophic inquiry was vital to the salvation of the soul and apprehension of the ultimate truth. This is certain. So this is very much familiar to those who have studied Eastern philosophy, that this inquiry, what is called in Sanskrit vichar, is very essential for the salvation of our own soul. But this much is true that whatever his teachings may be, his influence on later philosophers and the development of Greek philosophy was enormous. Plato references Pythagoras in a number of his works. He mentions his name. And Pythagoras thought, Pythagorean thought, as understood and relayed by other ancient writers, is the underlying form of Plato's philosophy. And Plato's famous student Aristotle also incorporated Pythagorean teachings in his own thought, and Aristotle's works would influence philosophers for many, many years. So indirectly, Pythagoras influenced Aristotle, and Aristotle influenced the later philosophers. So although Pythagoras remains a mysterious figure, but paradoxically, he also stands as one of the most significant figures in the development of philosophical and religious thought. So even though we cannot say anything for certain regarding his life or original teachings, but enough of his thought was developed by later disciples and admirers to have influenced the great Greek philosophers who came later. That is the thing. So just to recapitulate, I will just again sum up the teachings of these three philosophers about whom we have discussed. So this, you see that this is the bust of Heraclitus, such a wonderful sculpture. Just see how they made it. Hair and all that, so detailed. So, and here you can see his principal teachings, his philosophy. A Greek philosopher of the late 6th century BC, he criticizes his predecessors and contemporaries for their failure to see the unity in experience. He claims to announce an everlasting logos according to which all things are one in some sense. And he says opposites are necessary for life, but they are unified in a system of balanced exchanges. The world itself consists of a law-like interchange of elements symbolized by fire. Thus, the world is not to be identified with any particular substance, but rather with an ongoing process governed by a law of change. This manifests itself as a moral law for human beings. According to that law, we should lead our lives. And our Eastern philosophy also says that we have to, this rhythm is the cosmic order of the whole universe, and we should abide by that order. If we don't, we will suffer. So this much about Heraclitus, and then we come to Democritus. Democritus is bust, you can see here. So he actually is also known as the laughing philosopher, Democritus, the atomist. So here you can see his teachings, known as the laughing philosopher because of the importance he placed on cheerfulness, a central figure in the development of philosophical atomism and the atomic theory of the universe. He was the first philosopher to claim that what people refer to as the Milky Way was the light of stars and not the result of actions of the gods. It's a significant thing. Then we come to our last one, the great Pythagoras. So he looks very much like a Eastern, with this headgear and all that. So his teachings, you can see here, emphasize the immortality and transmigration of the soul and virtuous humane behavior towards all living beings. He is best known in the modern day for the Pythagorean theorem. He was considered by contemporaries and later writers as a mystic, not a mathematician, as he is sometimes defined. And his school was associated with spiritual salvation and miraculous revelation.
He died very young. 32 years.
71 and 374 years.
32 years.
How 32? We are going in the opposite direction.
32 years.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
74.
Yeah.
74 years. Okay, I think I have given you enough headache for a Tylenol or something. So let's stop our discussion here, then we can have a song or two.